We're going to talk about Bradford now, and we're not talking about the road to Wembley because it's almost a year since George Galloway pulled off his historic Bradford West By-Election win. Now a new report has criticised Labour for complacency that led to the loss of a seat it had held for decades. The research carried out by political think tank Democratic Audit is published tomorrow, and Len Tingle has been allowed this exclusive preview.
The National Media Museum, a fitting place to launch a report into the factors behind what it calls the Bradford earthquake, because it argues television and social media played a major part in causing it.
Welcome to Comment with me, George Galloway, at the end of another tumultuous week. Here on Press TV, every week at this time, I bring you the big conversation.
This is Tehran-based Press TV, and George Galloway's had his own weekly programme on here for years. Aimed at Arabic countries, its viewers see him as a respected international political commentator. Those appearances on Arabic TV stations were a major factor in George Galloway's success in winning votes in the Bradford West By-Election. That's according to political writer Lewis Baston. It's a major change from how we've historically understood the power of television.
Back in the 50s, everybody would watch the same channel because there was only one channel. Now we've got hundreds. People will have seen George Galloway talking on Iranian Press TV, they'll have listened to him on TalkSport, they'll have seen him confront the US Senate in one of YouTube's favourite ever political clips.
Channels and programmes more popular with the large Pakistani Muslim population in Bradford than, say, Celebrity Big Brother. But a more conventional television programme provided yet another important boost.
George Galloway, you were a Labour MP for a number of years.
Oh, the Sunday politics debate on the weekend before the poll in Bradford West was crucial. It was a turning point. It showcased George Galloway's skills. George Galloway's use of social media was much smarter than the other parties. He was the first politician, as far as I know, in Britain to have a special little app for iPhones. The other parties, sure, they had websites, but they were slow-moving compared to what Respect were doing in this.
The report also highlights how mainstream parties like Labour traditionally took the votes of younger Asian voters and women for granted by negotiating with elders who decided how their family clan would vote. Respect campaigned against it. Do you think that you've smashed that bradery, that clan system? Do you think that's gone forever now?
Something that's existed for thousands of years within the Asian subcontinent won't be gone within one by-election. I think there's been cracks within it. What we want to see is and encourage is a unified Bradford through political engagement of diverse communities.
Labour held its own internal investigation into how it lost a seat it had held for 38 years. It admitted complacency by relying on its historic support, but also using that clan elder system to, in the words of the shadow cabinet member who wrote the report, hoover up votes.
It's shocking that in 2010, 11, 12, there are sort of politicians who think they can be elected that way. I'm pleased to say that we as a party took very seriously the loss in Bradford, took very seriously the idea that votes have been taken for granted.
This is George Galloway, Member of Parliament for Bradford West.
And then there was the all-important razzmatazz, promoting policies that clearly appealed to a much wider electorate. Old-fashioned street politics, open-topped buses, and those legendary Galloway oratory skills.
And the man himself joins us now. George Galloway, welcome back to the Sunday Politics. You're credited in this report of breaking this system of bradery, this ancient system of political tribal loyalty. Do you fear that normal service could be resumed at the general election?
Well, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven listening to that report, I must tell you. It was almost as good as the day itself. Of course, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. The next election will tell us whether that bradery system that you described aptly as very historic and involving parties negotiating with elders who then deliver votes which the party concerned hoovers up, whether or not that's gone for good or not. I believe myself that it has gone for good, at least in Bradford, because I don't think that having seen Paris they're going to be able to put them back on the farm. The people who came out and voted as they wished, rather than voted on the basis of the candidate's father having come from the same village as their father in Mirpur 60 years ago, people realised that in a modern democracy there has to be a better reason for voting for someone than that. But we'll see, time will tell.
Carl Turner, do you want to deal with that point made by Sadiq Khan there? He admits Labour took an awful lot of voters for granted in Bradford. It could happen elsewhere, couldn't it?
I think there was a couple of factors, actually. I think the Galloway factor was a very definite issue. He's a forceful character. He's actually very charismatic. He's a great orator, and I think that had an effect. I also think there was a feeling that we'd taken the electorate for granted, and I'm sure we've learned from that mistake. We won the by-election in Rotherham, we won Manchester, we've won other by-elections, we've won Croydon in the south.
Well, yeah, George Galloway, we may have seen the Bradford spring, but we certainly didn't see the Rotherham spring, did we? Your success of the Respect Party wasn't repeated in the by-election there.
No, though we did beat both the Tories and the Liberal Democrats, the two governing parties in the country, though I suppose that's not quite the boast it once was. It's true that Ed Miliband is a skilled and modern leader. I admire him. I hope he's Prime Minister and before long. But the medium is important. But the message has to match the medium. I mean, Peter Mandelson modernised Labour's methods of communication. But if the message that you're communicating is one of support for war, which they now call missions, for austerity, not quite as fast, not quite as deep so quickly, then it just won't wash with large sections of the community who need something radically different. Bradford West has 10% rise year on year in its unemployment figures. We are in an economic emergency in Bradford West. And if you're not addressing those facts, it doesn't matter how well you put your point of view in terms of the method of communication, the message just doesn't match up.
Alex Shelbrooke, do you think your party could learn anything from George Galloway?
I actually think our party learnt a lot in 1997, when I think a lot of Conservative MPs had become very arrogant, had taken their electorate for granted and got absolutely booted out in some of the safest seats in the country. I think what became apparent to me when I was out in the Bradford West by-election was that, having gone there, thinking to myself, you know, we may have a chance in this election if George Galloway splits the Labour vote. As soon as you get on the street, knock on doors, do the street campaigning which George Galloway does so well, you realised he was going to walk it. The result came as no surprise. What's important is you've got to communicate with your electorate.
Well, stay with us, because we'll take a look now at some more of the week's political news in our part of the world. Nick Morris has our roundup in 60 seconds.
Cuts to the army, including Yorkshire and Lincolnshire regiments, angered Scunthorpe Labour MP Nick Dakin. He spoke up at Prime Minister's Question Time.
On Monday, Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister stated that the task for our generation was the struggle against terrorism. On Tuesday, his government sacked 5,600 troops.
Figures out this week show a fall in unemployment, but our region still has the third highest level in the country, with almost 9% out of work. UKIP MEP Godfrey Bloom wasn't impressed by the Prime Minister's promise of renegotiating our EU membership terms, then a referendum.
So European Union is part of the problem, it's not part of the solution.
And controversy from Bradford's Liberal Democrat David Ward. On Holocaust Memorial Day, he criticised Israel's treatment of Palestinians since the Second World War.
George Galloway, I want your reaction to what your fellow Bradford MP David Ward's been saying. Was he right to criticise Israel on Holocaust Memorial Day?
Well, absolutely right to criticise Israel. The problem was the language that he chose seemed to blame Jews, and this is an elementary schoolboy howler at best, and something deeply disgraceful at worst. We are not against Jews. Jews are religious people of the book. It is absurd to blame Jews for the suffering of the Palestinian people. Our quarrel is with Zionism, and with Israel. I suspect that it's the disgraceful rather than the howler, because David Ward, like all Liberal Democrat MPs, is steering unemployment himself down the barrel of the next election. And I think that this was a rather gross, crass effort to scrape up some votes that he might think would otherwise go elsewhere.
Well, he's got a meeting with the Lib Dem whips tomorrow. Alex Shelbrooke, was David Ward right to say what he did?
No, I think it's outrageous. I mean, Holocaust Memorial Day is a day when we remember where intolerance leads. And to twist it and talk about a Jewish people rather than the state of Israel, as George says, was wrong. Now, you know, I'm a supporter of the state of Israel, but I like to think that I am a critical supporter, that, you know, not everything is right. Let's not forget that Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip and have suffered missiles coming in. That's one thing, but that doesn't give the right to treat the West Bank as it is currently being treated, and there are things to be done. But to actually pick on someone's religion and to make those comparisons, I'm afraid I find totally unacceptable.
OK, Carl Turner, EU referendum. Depending on who you speak to from the Labour Party on any given day, you get a different answer. What's your belief?
Well, I think our policy on this is consistent, actually. In October 2011, I went through the division lobby with the Prime Minister and Ed Miliband, the leader of my party, saying that we didn't want a referendum on the EU. The Prime Minister's position is all over the place. He's been pulled to one side by UKIP, pulled to another side by 110 plus backbench Tory MPs who actually care more about getting rid of David Cameron, I think, than they do about coming out of the EU. So his position is completely inconsistent. It's bad timing. You know, what we need is certainty in the economy. Unemployment in my area on the figures is going up. What we need is certainty, and we need investors like Siemens, who hopefully are coming to Hull, to be confident that we've got an absolutely consistent position.
Well, we've got a consistent position now. We know that we're going to say to the British people, at this moment in time, with so much flux in Europe, it's not the right time to say in-out, which is what last year's vote was about. We're going to renegotiate the position as things move forward, which is support from Chancellor Merkel. That actually gives some confidence to settle this question once for all. And then we will say to the British people, do you want to stay in under this new relationship, or do you want out?
And what about you, George Galloway? Would you like to see an EU referendum?
Definitely. Right away. Bring it on. I think the people of this country have rejected, as indeed have the people in most EU countries, rejected the kind of European Union that we currently have. It's an EU of bankers and fat cats in the EU Commission in Brussels, a totally dysfunctional, virtually silent European Parliament, all of it costing billions at a time when that money could be far better spent. So we're in favour of an EU referendum, and the sooner the better.
So you'll be campaigning alongside right-wing Tories, will you?
No, we'll campaign for our own independent position, which is internationalist, which is pro-European, anti-EU.
I liked your twist on the Bradford Spring during the week. You tweeted, Bradford Spring is here to stay because we're going to Wembley.
Wembley,
is your adopted team going to win?
Oh, I think so. I think the wind is in the sails of Bradford now. The zeitgeist is with us. It just goes to show what a by-election can do.
We must leave it there. Carl Turner, George Galloway, Alex Shelbrooke, thanks for your time. Now back to Andrew Neil in London.